She gave her leftover dinner to a shivering kid at closing time, thinking she'd never see him again. But when strange visitors started asking about the royal child, she realized the boy wasn't human, and his father, the ancient vampire king with burning red eyes, had been watching her all along. The storm hit harder than the weather app said it would. Meera wiped down the last table at Fletcher's diner. Her sneakers squeaked against the checkered floor. Outside rain hammered the windows like angry fists. It was nearly midnight, and she was alone again. "Just lock up and go home," she said to herself, tossing the rag into the sink behind the counter. But something felt wrong tonight. The air inside the diner had grown cold, really cold, even though the heater was running at full blast. Her breath came out in visible puffs. Meera rubbed her arms, frowning at the thermostat. 72 degrees, it claimed. Liar. Thunder cracked overhead and the lights flickered. That's when she saw it. Through the foggy window, just beyond the neon open sign that she'd forgotten to turn off, stood a figure. Tall, impossibly tall. The rain seemed to bend around him, never quite touching his dark coat. But it was his eyes that made Meera's heart stop. Two burning points of red light that pierced through the storm and the glass and locked onto her. She blinked. He was gone. "Get it together," Meera whispered, shaking her head. Just the storm playing tricks. But her hands trembled as she reached for the sign switch. The door chimed. Meera spun around, her pulse hammering. A boy stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with pale skin and dark hair stuck to his forehead. His clothes, an old-fashioned button-up shirt and dark pants, clung to his thin body. He didn't move, just stood there shivering, water pooling beneath his feet. "Sweetie, are you okay?" Meera rushed toward him, grabbing a handful of napkins from the nearest holder. "Where are your parents?" The boy's eyes, strange amber-colored eyes, darted toward the window, then back to her. "He said nothing. Come on, sit down." "You're freezing." Meera guided him to a booth near the back, away from the windows. She wrapped a clean apron around his shoulders. "Are you lost? Do you need me to call someone?" The boy shook his head slowly. His lips had a bluish tint, and his whole body trembled, but not entirely from the cold, Meera realized. He looked terrified. "Okay, no calling." "Got it." Meera softened her voice. "How about some food? I was about to throw out my dinner anyway. Burger and fries, okay?" For the first time, the boy's expression shifted. His eyes widened with something like desperate hunger, and he nodded quickly. Meera hurried to the kitchen and grabbed her untouched meal from the back counter, a bacon cheeseburger, fries, and a slice of apple pie she'd been saving. She heated it up quickly and brought it out with a glass of chocolate milk. "Here you go, honey. Eat slow, okay?" The boy stared at the plate like it was treasure. He picked up the burger with both hands and took a careful bite, then another. His movements were slow, almost fancy, as though he'd been taught proper manners, but was fighting against pure hunger. Meera slid into the opposite side of the booth, watching him with growing concern. Something about this kid wasn't right. It wasn't just the weird clothes or the way he'd appeared out of nowhere during a storm. It was the way he kept glancing at the door, his body tensed like a rabbit ready to run. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The boy swallowed his bite. "Lucian," he whispered. His voice was soft and formal. "Thank you for the food, miss." "You're welcome, Lucian," she smiled. "Are you in trouble?" Lucian's amber eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something ancient flickering behind them, something that didn't belong in a child's gaze. "Yes," he said simply. "Big trouble." Before Meera could ask what he meant, the temperature dropped again. The lights above them buzzed and dimmed. The chocolate milk in Lucian's glass rippled as though something heavy had just landed on the diner's roof. Lucian's face went white. "He's here? Who's here?" A low sound came from outside. Not thunder this time, but something living. A growl that made Meera's chest feel tight and made her teeth ache. The windows rattled in their frames. "I have to go," Lucian said, scrambling out of the booth. The apron fell to the floor. "Wait!" Meera stood up, reaching for him. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Meera heard Lucian's panicked breathing. She fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, showing the empty booth where Lucian had been sitting just seconds ago. Lucian? The front door stood wide open. Rain poured in, soaking the welcome mat. Meera ran to the entrance, phone lights sweeping across the parking lot. Fog rolled in, thick, unnatural fog that seemed to move with purpose. It swallowed the streetlights, the road, everything. And standing at the far edge of the parking lot, barely visible through the mist, was the figure from before, the Vampire King. Meera's thinking mind screamed that vampires weren't real, that she was exhausted and seeing things. But her instincts, the old part of her brain that remembered when humans were prey, knew better. He was real, and he was staring at her. The man stood at least 6.5 feet tall, dressed in clothes that looked hundreds of years old, a long black coat over a dark vest and shirt, all of it torn and stained. His face was sharp and angular, almost too perfect to be human. But those eyes, those burning red eyes, held an intelligence and power that made Meera feel like an insect under a microscope. Beside him, barely reaching his waist, stood Lucian. The boy looked up at the towering figure with a mixture of fear and relief. The Vampire King placed one pale hand on Lucian's shoulder. His gaze never left Meera. For 3 heartbeats, they stared at each other across the rain and fog. Meera felt stripped bare, every secret, every kindness, every petty thought laid open before those ancient eyes. She should run. She should scream. She should do anything except stand there frozen. But she couldn't move. Then, without a word, the Vampire King turned. His coat billowed despite the lack of wind, and he simply vanished. One moment he was there with Lucian, and the next they were both gone, swallowed by the fog as though they'd never existed. The lights in the diner flickered back on. The storm began to fade. Meera stood in the doorway, drenched and shaking, staring at the spot where they'd disappeared. On the wet pavement, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Footprints. 2 sets. One small, one large. But they didn't lead away from the diner. They simply ended, as though their owners had disappeared into thin air. Meera looked down at her own trembling hands and realized with absolute certainty that her quiet life had just shattered. That boy wasn't human, and his father, the thing with the red eyes, was something far worse than any nightmare. She should forget this ever happened, lock the door, go home, and pretend it was all exhaustion and imagination. But deep in her gut, Meera knew the truth. They would be back. And when they returned, she would be ready, or dead. Meera didn't sleep that night. She sat in her tiny apartment above the hardware store, curtains drawn, lights on, with a kitchen knife on the coffee table. Every creak of the building made her jump. Every shadow seemed to hide red eyes. By morning, she'd almost convinced herself it was a dream. Stress, too many double shifts, the mind playing tricks. But when she returned to the diner for the evening shift, the evidence was waiting. The booth where Lucian had sat was exactly as she'd left it, plate still on the table, half-eaten burger growing cold. She'd run out so fast after they disappeared that she'd forgotten to clean up. Now, in the gray afternoon light, she saw something she'd missed in the darkness. The chocolate milk glass had a crack running down its side, and inside the crack the milk had frozen solid. "Impossible," Meera whispered, touching the glass. Her finger came away wet and cold, so cold it burned. She threw the glass in the trash and spent the next hour scrubbing every surface as if she could erase what had happened. The diner filled with its usual evening crowd. Truckers. A family with 2 kids. Old Mr. Peterson, who came in every Tuesday for meatloaf. Normal. Everything was normal until sunset. The temperature dropped the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. Meera watched the thermometer on the wall fall from 75 to 60 in less than a minute. The other customers didn't seem to notice, but she felt it in her bones. They were coming back. At 8:30, the family left. At 9, the truckers paid and headed out. By 9:15, only Mr. Peterson remained, hunched over his coffee and newspaper. "Storm's rolling in again," he said without looking up. "You should close early, Meera. Roads are going to be bad. Meera glanced outside. The sky was clear. Stars glittered above the parking lot. What storm? Mr. Peterson finally looked up, his eyes glassy and distant. The one that's already here. Then he stood, dropped a 20 on the table, and walked out without another word. The bell above the door chimed. Silence fell over the diner like a blanket. Meera was alone. Okay, she said aloud, trying to steady her nerves. Just lock up, go home. Nothing's going to— The lights flickered. Her heart stopped. Then came the growl. That same deep rumbling sound from last night. It vibrated through the floor, rattling the silverware in their bins. Meera grabbed a knife from behind the counter and turned toward the windows. Fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. It poured under the door crack, thick and gray and wrong. Within seconds, it filled the diner floor, swirling around Meera's ankles. The temperature dropped. Her breath came out in white clouds. "Lucian?" she called out, her voice shaking. "Are you there?" Movement in the fog. A small figure appeared near the door. Lucian, still wearing the same old-fashioned clothes, now dry. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "You shouldn't have stayed," he said softly. "He's angry." "Who? Your father?" Lucian nodded. "He thinks you saw too much. That you're a risk? A risk to what?" Before Lucian could answer, the fog exploded outward, forming a wall of gray between them. Meera stumbled backward, knife raised. Through the swirling mist, a darker shape appeared. The Vampire King. He moved like liquid shadow, each step silent and exact. Up close, he was even more terrifying. His face pale as marble, his features sharp enough to cut. Those red eyes burned with an intensity that made Meera want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You fed my son," he said. His voice was deep with an accent she couldn't place. Old, very old. "He was hungry," Meera replied, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "And cold. What was I supposed to do? Turn away like humans always do? But you didn't. Why?" "Because he's a kid. He is a prince, the heir to the oldest bloodline in existence. And you?" He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her 5'4" frame. "You are nothing but a fragile mortal who now knows too much." Meera's grip tightened on the knife. "So what? You're going to kill me?" The king's lips curved into something that might have been a smile but held no warmth. "I should. It would be cleaner." "Father, please." Lucian appeared beside him, tugging on the king's coat. "She helped me. She was kind." "Kindness is a weakness, Lucian." "I've told you this. Then why didn't you let me die in the rain?" The king's expression flickered, just for a moment. Something almost human crossed his face. Pain, loss. Then it was gone, replaced by cold stone. He looked back at Meera. "You have been marked, human. My son's gratitude has left an impression on you, a trace of our world. Others will sense it. They will come for you." "Others? You mean more vampires?" "Worse. Those who seek to destroy my family. By showing kindness to the prince, you have made yourself a target." He leaned closer, and Meera smelled rain and earth and something metallic. "I could end you now, mercifully, before they arrive. Or what?" The king's red eyes stared into hers. "Or you survive what's coming, prove that human compassion is more than a lie. But I warn you, Waitress, the windows shattered inward." Glass exploded across the diner as two figures crashed through, moving faster than Meera's eyes could track. She caught a glimpse of pale skin, dark clothes, and eyes that glowed silver instead of red. The Vampire King shoved Lucian behind him and let out a roar that shook the building's foundation. "Run. Human," he commanded. But Meera's legs wouldn't move. The hunt had begun. The attackers were gone as quickly as they'd appeared. The Vampire King had moved with blinding speed, meeting them in midair before they could touch Lucian. For 3 seconds, the diner became a blur of shadows and snarls. Then, just as suddenly, the silver-eyed vampires retreated, leaping back through the broken windows and vanishing into the night. The king stood motionless, his coat torn, a thin line of dark blood across his cheek. He didn't look winded. He looked furious. "They were testing our defenses," he said, more to himself than to Meera or Lucian. "Foolish but bold. Meera finally found her voice. What were those things? Scouts from the rebellion. The king turned to his son, checking him over with surprising gentleness. Are you hurt? Lucian shook his head, but his small body trembled. I'm sorry, father. I led them here. I shouldn't have come back. Enough. The king's voice softened slightly. This is not your fault. He looked at Meera, his red eyes calculating. They know about you now. They saw you standing with us. In their eyes, you are already part of this war. I don't want to be part of any war, Meera said, her voice rising. I just wanted to help a scared kid. Then you should have looked the other way. The king moved toward the shattered window, glass crunching under his boots. But it's too late for regrets. Lock your doors tonight, human. Pray they don't consider you important enough to chase. Wait, you're just leaving? What if they come back? The king paused. Something flickered in his expression, concern, maybe doubt. Then it vanished. You are not my responsibility. He lifted Lucian into his arms, and before Meera could protest, they both turned into shadow and mist, leaving her alone in the destroyed diner. Meera didn't call the police. How could she? Officer, yes. Vampires broke my windows while fighting over a kid who may or may not be a prince of darkness. They'd lock her up. She told her boss, Frank, that a deer had crashed through the window. He grumbled about insurance and told her to take the next day off while repairs were done. She spent that day jumping at every sound, checking her locks over and over and researching vampires on the internet until her eyes burned. Most of it was nonsense. Garlic, crosses, sparkling in sunlight. But some older sources, dusty folklore from Eastern Europe, mentioned vampire courts, bloodline wars, and ancient kings who ruled from the shadows. She should leave town, pack up, and disappear. But something kept her there. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of Lucian's terrified face. Or maybe she was just too tired to run. On the second evening, she returned to work. The windows had been replaced, and the diner looked almost normal. Almost. There was still a coldness in the air that the heater couldn't touch, and Meera couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At 7 o'clock, 2 customers walked in. Meera knew immediately they weren't human. They moved too smoothly, their steps perfectly matched. A man and a woman, both wearing expensive black clothes that looked out of place in the small-town diner. Their skin was white as chalk, their features too perfect, like porcelain dolls brought to creepy life. But it was their eyes that confirmed it, pale gray, almost colorless, with an intensity that made Meera's survival instinct scream. They sat at the counter. Neither picked up a menu. Good evening, the woman said, her voice musical but hollow. We're looking for someone. Meera's hand trembled as she poured water into glasses she knew they wouldn't drink. Can I help you? A child, the man said, tilting his head at an unnatural angle. About 10 years old, dark hair, amber eyes. Have you seen such a boy? No, Meera lied. Haven't seen any kids like that. The woman leaned forward, inhaling deeply. Curious. This place reeks of royal blood. Old blood. The king has been here. I don't know what you're talking about. The man smiled, showing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. You're lying, little human. We can hear your heartbeat speeding up. Smell the fear in your sweat? The woman reached across the counter and grabbed Meera's wrist before she could pull away. Her grip was ice-cold and unmovable, like a steel trap. The king has marked you. We can sense his son's gratitude printed on your aura. Tell us, where is the royal child? I said, I don't know. Meera tried to yank her arm free, but the woman's fingers only tightened. Pity, the man said, standing up. The king is weak, sentimental. His attachment to that boy makes him vulnerable. When we find the prince, we'll use him to draw out the king. And when the king falls, a new order will rise. The woman finally released Meera's wrist, leaving red marks that would bruise by morning. You should choose your side carefully, human. The king's reign is ending. Those loyal to him will burn with him. They moved toward the door, but the man paused, pulling something from his pocket, a small knife with a black blade. He walked to the door and, with slow precision, carved something into the wood. A symbol, circular with sharp lines sticking out from the center like a broken sun. "What is that?" Meera whispered. "A marker," the woman said from the doorway. "So others know you have been touched by the king's world. You're part of this now, whether you wish it or not." As they stepped outside, the symbol began to glow, faint and sickly green in the dim light. "Pleasant dreams." "Human," the man called back. Then they were gone. Meera stared at the glowing mark carved into her door, her whole body shaking. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was marked, claimed, a pawn in a war she didn't understand. And somewhere out there, a scared little boy and his terrifying father were fighting for their lives. Meera didn't go straight home that night. The glowing mark on the diner door haunted her. Every time she looked at it, her skin crawled. She tried to scrub it off, but the mark remained, pulsing faintly under the bright lights like a beacon. "A marker," the woman had said. "So others know you have been touched by the king's world." Others. More vampires. More danger. She needed air, space, something other than the four walls of the diner that now felt like a cage. So instead of taking the main highway back to her apartment, Meera turned onto the old access road that cut through Blackwood Forest, a route she'd taken countless times as a kid. The trees closed in around her car, their branches forming a tunnel lit only by her headlights. The radio crackled with static. She turned it off. Silence pressed against her ears, then her engine sputtered. "No, no, no." Meera pumped the gas pedal, but the car jerked once, twice, and died. The headlights flickered out, dropping her into complete darkness. Her phone showed no signal. Of course. Meera sat in the dead car, breathing hard, trying to think. She was maybe 2 miles from the main road. She could walk it. It would take 30 minutes, maybe 40. Or she could wait until morning. A child's sob cut through the night. Meera's head snapped toward the sound. It came from somewhere in the woods off to her left. "Faint but clear, Lucian," she whispered. Another sob, closer this time. Against every ounce of common sense, Meera grabbed her phone, turned on its flashlight, and stepped out of the car. The forest swallowed her immediately. Branches scraped at her jacket. Roots tried to trip her, but she followed the sound of crying, pushing deeper into the trees. She found him curled at the base of an old oak tree. Lucian sat with his knees pulled to his chest, his formal clothes torn and dirty. Blood, dark, almost black, stained his collar. He looked up when her light found him, and his amber eyes were filled with pure terror. "Meera." His voice broke. "You shouldn't be here. They're hunting us. They're hunting me." She knelt beside him, checking for injuries. "Who's hunting you?" "Those pale vampires from the diner, the rebellion. They want to kill my father and take his throne. But they need to destroy me first, the legitimate heir." Lucian's whole body shook. "I can't control it yet. My abilities. When I'm scared, things happen. Bad things. I could hurt you without meaning to. Where's your father?" "Fighting. He told me to run, to hide. But Lucian's words cut off as the temperature dropped. The fog rolled in, but this time it felt different, protective, purposeful. The Vampire King appeared from the shadows like a nightmare given form. His coat was shredded, showing the torn vest beneath. Deep claw marks ran across his chest, bleeding that same dark blood. His face was covered with it, but those red eyes were sharp, focused, and locked onto Meera with an intensity that made her freeze. "You," he growled. "Why are you here?" "My car died. I heard Lucian crying. So you walked into a forest alone at night?" He moved closer, and she could see the rage simmering beneath his controlled face. "Are all humans this suicidal? Or just you?" "I was trying to help." "Your help is not needed." His voice rose, echoing through the trees. "You are a problem, a weakness they will use. Every moment you spend near my son puts him in greater danger." Lucian scrambled to his feet. "Father, please." "Silence, Lucian." The king's gaze never left Meera. "She does not understand our world. She cannot understand what they will do to her if they capture her alive. They will drain her slowly, use her pain to draw us out, and throw away her body as a message. Mira's throat went dry, but she stood her ground. Then help me understand. Explain instead of just threatening me. For a moment, the king looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression hardened again. You should leave now. Forget you ever saw us. The rebels already marked me, Meera shot back. They carved a symbol into my diner door. They said I'm part of this whether I want to be or not. Something flickered across the king's face. Concern, maybe recognition. His jaw tightened. Show me. Meera pulled out her phone and showed him the photo she'd taken of the mark. The king's expression darkened. The hunter's mark, he said quietly. They've declared you an enemy of their cause. They will come for you. Then what am I supposed to do? Before the king could answer, Lucian gasped and pointed behind them. Father, they're here. Red eyes appeared in the darkness. Dozens of them surrounding them in a wide circle. Shapes moved between the trees, too fast to count. The rebels had found them, and Meera was trapped in the middle. The vampire king's voice dropped to a deadly calm. Your kindness has consequences, human. You wanted to understand our world? He stepped in front of both Meera and Lucian, his body tense and ready. Then witness it. The first rebel jumped from the shadows, fangs bared. The king caught them in midair by the throat and slammed them into the ground with bone-crushing force. The battle had begun, and Meera realized with sinking dread that there was no walking away from this. She was in it now, all the way. The forest exploded into violence. Rebels poured from the shadows like a flood, moving with supernatural speed. The vampire king met them with brutal efficiency, his movements exact, controlled, terrifying. He didn't kill them, Meera noticed. He broke bones, tore limbs, knocked them unconscious, but he didn't deliver killing blows. Even in battle, he followed some ancient code. Stay behind me, he roared as 3 rebels tried to come around from the side. Meera grabbed Lucian and pulled him close, pressing their backs against the oak tree. The boy was breathing too fast, his amber eyes starting to glow brighter. Lucian, breathe, she whispered urgently. Just breathe. I can't control it. His skin began to shimmer, heat coming from his small body. If I lose control, I'll hurt you. The power just comes out. A rebel broke through the king's defense, lunging straight for Lucian. Meera didn't think. She grabbed a fallen branch and swung it with everything she had. It connected with the vampire's temple. The branch shattered, but the rebel stumbled, giving the king enough time to grab the attacker and hurl them into a tree with a sickening thud. Foolish! The king snarled at Meera, even as he fought off 2 more rebels, but brave. More kept coming. They fought differently than the king, wild, frenzied, desperate. These weren't trained warriors. They were revolutionaries fueled by ideas and rage. There's too many, Meera shouted. The king's red eyes blazed. Then we run! He grabbed Lucian with one arm and, to Meera's shock, grabbed her wrist with his free hand. His grip was iron cold but not painful. Hold on. The world blurred. Meera's stomach lurched as the king moved with impossible speed, weaving between trees so fast that everything became streaks of shadow and moonlight. Wind screamed in her ears. Her feet barely touched the ground. The rebels gave chase, their howls echoing through the forest. They burst onto a narrow trail. Meera recognized the old hiking path she'd explored as a teenager. It led to the ranger station, 1/2 a mile north, she gasped. It's abandoned, but the building's still there. The king didn't question her. He changed direction, following her instructions as she shouted them between ragged breaths. Behind them, the rebels were getting closer. Lucian's glow grew brighter. Father, I can't hold it back much longer. Yes, you can, the king said firmly. You are my son. You are stronger than this fear. The ranger station appeared through the trees, a small wooden building with boarded windows and a sagging porch. The king kicked the door open, the lock shattering, and they tumbled inside. He set them both down and immediately began pushing furniture against the door and windows. They'll break through, Lucian whimpered, tears streaming down his glowing face. They always break through. Meera knelt in front of him, ignoring the heat coming from his skin. Hey, look at me. What happens when you lose control? Fire, Lucian whispered. I make fire. Last time I burned down an entire building. People were inside. They didn't make it out. Those were rebels, the king said sharply, still putting up barriers. Enemies who would have killed you. They were still people. Lucian's voice cracked. I heard them screaming. The windows rattled as something heavy slammed against them. Shadows moved outside, circling the building. Meera's mind raced. She knew this station. She'd practically lived here during her rebellious teen years when she volunteered for the ranger program. She knew its layout, its weaknesses, its secrets. The basement, she said suddenly. There's a root cellar, stone walls, underground. If Lucian loses control down there, the fire won't spread as easily. The king stared at her. I know this place better than I know my own apartment. And there's a back exit through the cellar. Leads to the old fire road. We can escape while they're focused on breaking through the front. For the first time, the king looked at her with something other than suspicion or disgust. It was brief, a flicker of grudging respect, but it was there. Show me. Meera led them to a corner where a faded rug covered a trapdoor. The king ripped it open, revealing stone steps going down into darkness. The smell of earth and old wood came up. Down now? The king ordered. They scrambled down as the front door splintered. Rebel vampires poured into the station above, their footsteps thundering across the floorboards. In the darkness of the cellar, Lucian's glow provided the only light. His breathing was hard, panicked. I'm sorry, he whispered to Meera. I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. You were just nice to me. You didn't deserve. Stop, Meera said softly, taking his trembling hands. They were scorching hot, but she didn't let go. I don't regret helping you. Not for a second. Above them, the rebels tore through the station, searching. The king stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening. Then he turned to Meera, his red eyes reflecting Lucian's light. The exit. Where? Meera pointed to the far wall where an old wooden door was barely visible. Through there. Leads up to the fire road about 50 yards from here. The king studied her face in the dim light. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before. You should have run when you had the chance, human. Why didn't you? Meera looked at Lucian, then back at the king. Because he's just a scared kid, and no child should face monsters alone. The king's expression shifted, something almost like pain crossing his features. Even when that child is a monster himself? Especially then. Above, a rebel shouted. They're not here. Check around the building. Move! Move! The king whispered. Now. They slipped through the cellar door just as footsteps thundered down the stairs. The fire road was overgrown and dark, barely visible under the thick tree cover. They ran in silence, Meera leading, the king carrying Lucian, whose glow had finally started to dim as the immediate danger passed. After a mile, the king stopped suddenly. They've lost our trail. We rest here. They collapsed in a small clearing. Meera's lungs burned. Her legs trembled. She wasn't built for midnight sprints through forests with supernatural beings. But Lucian was safe. That's what mattered. The boy had finally stopped glowing, his exhaustion clear in the way he slumped against a fallen log. The king checked him over with surprising tenderness, brushing dirt from his hair, checking him for injuries. I'm okay, father, Lucian murmured. I didn't lose control. Meera helped me stay calm. The king's gaze shifted to Meera. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, his face looked less monstrous and more weary, ancient and tired. You knew the forest paths, he said. The hidden exit. You led us to safety when I had no plan. I grew up around here, Meera said, still catching her breath. I know these woods. That is not what I mean. The king stood, pacing the small clearing like a caged animal. You helped us again, despite the danger, despite knowing what we are. What's your point? He stopped pacing and fixed her with those burning red eyes. My point is that it makes no sense. Humans are selfish creatures. They take, they destroy, they betray. I've seen it for centuries. Watched your kind wage wars over tiny pieces of land, murder for money, abandon their own children when times get hard. His voice carried centuries of bitterness. So why do you keep helping us? What do you want? Meera pushed herself to her feet, anger flaring. Maybe I just don't want a kid to die. Did that occur to you? No child is worth your life. That's where you're wrong. The king's expression hardened. You speak of compassion, but compassion is weakness. It makes you vulnerable, easy to trick. The rebels will use it against you, torture you to draw out Lucian, knowing you would scream loud enough to break his focus. Then I guess I'm weak, Meera shot back. But at least I'm not so broken that I think kindness is a disease. The temperature around them dropped. The king moved toward her with predatory grace, stopping inches away. Up close, Meera could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his skin seemed carved from marble, the way his eyes held depths of power and pain. You think you understand our world? He said quietly, dangerously. You've seen one battle, one night of violence, but this war has raged for decades. My wife, Lucian's mother, was murdered by these same rebels 3 years ago. They tore her apart while Lucian watched, hiding in a closet, too terrified to even cry out. Meera's anger drained away, replaced by horror. I didn't know. How could you? The king's voice cracked slightly. She was compassionate too. Believed vampires and humans could live together peacefully. That belief got her killed. So forgive me if I find your optimism difficult to trust. Lucian's small voice broke the tension. Meera is not like the humans who betrayed us, father. She's different, is she? The king turned back to Meera. Or will she run the moment things become truly horrifying? When she sees what I am capable of, what Lucian will become? Meera met his gaze steadily. I'm still here, aren't I? For now. The king studied her face. But they marked you. The hunter's mark doesn't fade. Every vampire who sees it will know you're connected to the royal bloodline. Lucian's gratitude for your kindness has created a magical bond. Faint but detectable. His emotions, his fears, they've left an imprint on your soul. What does that mean? It means your life is no longer your own, the king said bluntly. The rebels will hunt you. They'll assume you know our secrets, our hideouts. They'll use you as bait. And when they're done with you, they'll leave you as a warning to others who might help us. Meera swallowed hard. So what are my options? Death, the king said it without emotion. Quick, by my hand before they find you. Or, for a long moment the king was silent. Then Lucian stood and walked to his father, taking his large pale hand. Or she stays with us, Lucian said firmly. She knows things we don't, human things. She knew the forest when you were lost. She understood how to calm me when I was losing control. We need her, father. She is a problem. She's the first person besides you who didn't run away from me, Lucian interrupted, his voice stronger than Meera had ever heard it. The first person who saw me as a child before seeing me as a monster. Mother would have liked her. The king flinched as if struck. Silence stretched between them. Meera could hear her own heartbeat, too loud in the quiet forest. Finally, the king spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. If you stay human, I cannot promise your safety. Our world is brutal, unforgiving. You will see things that will haunt you. I'm already haunted, Meera said. Might as well make it count for something. The king studied her for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. Very well. But understand this. If you betray us, if you lead them to my son, I will end you myself. No hesitation. No mercy. Noted. And if we survive this? The king's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps I was wrong about all humans being selfish. Lucian smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that transformed his pale face. We should move, the king said, breaking the moment. They'll expand their search pattern. We need to reach the cathedral by dawn. Cathedral? Meera asked. A sanctuary protected by ancient wards. If we can reach it, we'll have time to plan our next move. As they prepared to leave, Lucian squeezed Meera's hand. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on us. Meera squeezed back. Someone's got to look out for you troublemakers. The cathedral loomed against the dawn sky like a broken promise. It sat on the outskirts of Millbrook, the neighboring town, a Gothic structure abandoned decades ago when the congregation dwindled to nothing. Gargoyles crouched on its peaked roof, their stone faces worn by time. Stained glass windows, cracked and faded, still caught the first rays of morning light. "This is your sanctuary?" Meera asked, eyeing the crumbling structure doubtfully. "Appearances deceive," the king said, approaching the heavy oak doors. He pressed his palm against the wood, and Meera saw symbols flare to life, ancient markings that glowed with pale blue light, crawling across the door like living things. "The wards here are older than this building, older than this country. They will hold." The doors groaned open, revealing darkness within. They entered cautiously. Inside, the cathedral was a mixture of decay and unexpected preservation. Pews sat covered in dust, but the stone floor showed intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. The air hummed with power. Meera could feel it prickling against her skin like static electricity. Lucian immediately moved to a corner and curled up, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. Within moments, he was asleep. The king stood at the altar, studying the shadows. "We have perhaps 6 hours before they trace us here. The wards will alert me if they break through the outer edge." Meera sat on a pew, her body aching from the night's chaos. "Then what? We can't run forever." "No," the king agreed quietly. "We can't." He turned to face her, and in the cathedral's strange light, he looked less like a monster and more like a man carrying an impossible weight. "The rebellion grows stronger every day. They have numbers, resources, and they have something I lack." "What's that?" "Unity." The king's jaw tightened. "I ruled through tradition and honor. But tradition is seen as weakness now. They want a new order, one built on fear and control. They believe vampires should stop hiding, should claim our place as the superior species. By wiping out humans? Eventually, yes." He moved closer, sitting on the pew across from her. "That is why Lucian matters. He is the legitimate heir. If they kill him, they can claim there is no rightful successor. The throne becomes contested, open to whoever is strongest." Meera looked at the sleeping child. "He's just a little boy. He should be worried about homework and making friends, not assassination attempts." "He stopped being just a boy the moment he was born into royalty." The king's voice carried deep sadness. "I never wanted this life for him. His mother and I had hoped." He trailed off, lost in memory. Before Meera could respond, footsteps echoed from somewhere deep within the cathedral. The king was on his feet instantly, putting himself between the sound and Lucian. Meera grabbed a piece of broken wood from a damaged pew, her makeshift weapon. A figure emerged from the shadows near the altar. A vampire, tall and elegant, wearing priest's robes. His eyes were the same red as the king's, and his face held a familiar sharpness. "Brother," the priest said, smiling, "you made it. Thank the ancestors." The king's posture relaxed slightly. "Marcus, I hoped you'd receive my message." "I did." Marcus approached, but his eyes kept darting to Meera. "And I see you've brought company. A human. Here. She's under my protection," the king said firmly. "How progressive." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The wards are strongest in the crypt below. I've prepared rooms for you and the prince. You'll be safe there while I coordinate with our remaining loyalists." Something about Marcus's tone made Meera's skin crawl, but the king seemed relieved. "Thank you, brother. After we rest, we need to discuss—" The cathedral doors exploded inward. Rebels poured through the entrance, dozens of them, moving with coordinated precision. They spread out immediately, surrounding the pews, cutting off all exits. Their silver eyes gleamed in the dim light. The king spun toward Marcus, betrayal and fury warring on his face. "You!" Marcus stepped back, his smile now genuine and cruel. "Did you truly think I'd let sentiment stand in the way of progress? You're weak, brother. You always have been, clinging to outdated honor codes, protecting humans, raising your son to be soft." "The wards," They should have stopped them, unless someone disabled them from the inside. Marcus spread his hands mockingly. I've been with the rebellion for months, feeding them information, tracking your movements. And now I've delivered you directly to them. Lucian woke with a gasp, immediately understanding the danger. His body began to glow, heat coming outward. The rebel leader stepped forward, a female vampire with silver eyes and a scar running down her face. Surrender the boy, and we'll make your death quick. Never, the king growled. Meera's mind raced. They were trapped, outnumbered, betrayed, with a terrified child on the verge of losing control. But she knew this building. She'd explored it as a curious teenager, fascinated by the abandoned architecture. The basement. There was an old alarm system, church bells operated by pulleys and mechanisms. If she could reach them. I have an idea, she whispered to the king. But you need to trust me. The king's eyes met hers. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding forged in shared danger. Do it, he said. Meera ran. Rebels moved to stop her, but the king unleashed a wave of power that sent them stumbling. She crashed through a side door, found the stairs, and descended into darkness. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle. Snarls, crashes, Lucian's frightened cries. She found the mechanism, ancient ropes connected to massive bronze bells above. She grabbed the main rope and pulled with everything she had. The bells rang out, deafening, echoing, their frequency tuned centuries ago to sacred purposes. And in a cathedral still humming with old magic, those bells became weapons. The vampires screamed. The bells rang like thunder, each peal shaking through the cathedral's stone bones. Meera kept pulling, her arms screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. Above her, the sound was doing exactly what she'd hoped. The ancient frequency combined with the cathedral's leftover wards created a disorienting wave that disrupted vampire senses. She heard crashes, confusion, shouts. The rebels' coordinated attack fell into chaos, then silence. Meera released the rope and stumbled back up the stairs, her heart pounding. The cathedral was a battlefield. Pews overturned, stone cracked, bodies lying across the floor. But they were breathing, unconscious but alive. The king stood in the center of it all, dark energy still crackling around his hands like black lightning. He'd clearly used the distraction to unleash something devastating. Marcus lay crumpled, near the altar, blood seeping from a wound across his chest. Lucian sat on the floor, his glow fading, tears streaming down his face. Uncle Marcus betrayed us, he whispered. Why would he do that? The king knelt beside his son, his expression softer than Meera had ever seen it. Fear, Lucian. He was afraid of change, afraid of what we might become. So he chose what felt like strength. He gently wiped Lucian's tears. But true strength is protecting those we love, even when it's difficult. The rebel leader groaned, stirring. The king stood and walked to her, his footsteps echoing. He placed his boot on her chest, keeping her pinned. Your rebellion ends here, he said coldly. Tell your followers that the king still stands, that the old ways still hold meaning. The rebel spat blood. Kill me. Another will take my place, and another. Your time is over, old king. Perhaps, the king's red eyes blazed. Or perhaps it's time for something new. Not your vision of control, but not my rigid traditions either. He looked at Meera, then back at the rebel. A human saved my son tonight. She showed more courage and loyalty than my own brother. She proved that strength doesn't come from fear or power alone. It comes from choosing compassion, even when it's dangerous. The rebel's eyes widened in disbelief. You would change our ways because of a human? I would change our ways because my son deserves a world where kindness isn't punished. The king removed his boot and stepped back. Go. Tell the rebellion that the king is willing to negotiate, to find a new path forward. But if they harm one hair on this human's head, or threaten my son again, I will show them why our bloodline has ruled for centuries." The rebel staggered to her feet, clutching her ribs. She looked at Meera with something between hatred and confusion, then at Lucian. Finally, she nodded curtly and limped toward the broken doors. The other rebels began to stir, and under the king's watchful gaze, they retreated one by one. Marcus remained on the floor, conscious now, shame written across his face. "Brother, You are no longer my brother," the king said quietly. "You will leave my territory and never return. If I see you again, I will not show mercy." Marcus pulled himself up, his priest's robes torn and bloody. He glanced at Lucian, regret flickering in his eyes, then vanished into the shadows. The cathedral fell silent except for the soft sound of Lucian's breathing. Meera walked to them, her legs shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. "Is it over?" "For now," the king said. He turned to her, and for the first time, something like respect, maybe even gratitude, softened his features. "You saved us. Your knowledge of this place, your quick thinking. Without you, we would have fallen. I just rang some bells. You did more than that." The king stepped closer, studying her face. "You showed me that I was wrong. Not all humans are selfish. Not all compassion is weakness. My wife tried to tell me that, but I was too consumed by grief to listen." Lucian stood and walked to Meera, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Will you stay with us, please? We could use someone like you." Meera looked down at the boy, then up at the king. Outside, dawn was breaking fully now, painting the stained glass windows in colors of gold and crimson. The king wouldn't be able to travel in direct sunlight. They'd need to wait for evening. "I don't belong in your world," Meera said softly. "Perhaps," the king agreed. "But perhaps our world needs those who don't belong, those who see things differently." He extended his hand, pale, cold, but steady. "I cannot offer you safety. I cannot promise you an easy life. But I can promise that your compassion will not be wasted, that we will build something better." Meera looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. This was insane. She was a waitress from a small town, not a player in vampire politics. But when she looked at Lucian's hopeful face, at the king's weary but determined expression, she realized something. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay. She took the king's hand. His grip was firm, respectful. "Okay," she said. "But I have conditions. No more secrets. No more treating me like I'm made of glass. And Lucian gets to be a kid sometimes. Homework, playing, normal things. Deal." The king's lips curved into what might have been a smile. Lucian laughed, a pure, joyful sound that echoed through the broken cathedral. As the sun rose higher, they sat together on the cathedral steps. The king pulled his coat tighter against the indirect light. Lucian dozed against his shoulder, and Meera watched the town below wake up to an ordinary day. But nothing was ordinary anymore. She had become a bridge between two worlds, human and vampire, compassion and power, old traditions and new possibilities. The king looked at her, his red eyes reflecting the morning light. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on us, for seeing my son as a child first." "Someone had to," Meera replied. As mist began to gather around them, the king's way of traveling safely in daylight, Lucian stirred and smiled up at her. "Will you be there when I wake up?" "Yeah, kid," Meera said, ruffling his hair. "I'll be there." The king lifted Lucian in his arms and turned to Meera. "Come. We have much work to do. The rebellion may have retreated, but rebuilding trust takes time. And you, Meera, will help us find that path." The mist swallowed them, carrying them away from the cathedral toward whatever future awaited. And as they disappeared into the morning light, Meera realized she'd found something she hadn't known she was searching for: a purpose, a family, and proof that kindness, even in the darkest places, could change everything.